7 years ago, on the 26th of September, at 3 in the morning, I stopped being a person who deserves happiness. That was the day James decided that I was worth more than our newborn son. 7 years, and I wake up with that weight on my chest. He tells me not to judge him, that he made the choice at a moment when there was no choice, that it was instinctive. But how can I not judge? That was our baby, flesh of our flesh, and they didn't even get to name him. I live now in the house we bought a month before that nightmare. A regular 2-story suburban house, with a white fence, with a lawn that James always mows himself. The neighbors think we are the ideal couple. He is a successful architect, I am a freelance designer, both good-looking, we smile. They don't know that our marriage is a facade covered with the ashes of that day. It all started, as it often does, with joyous news that was supposed to mend our problems, not destroy us. I was 33. James was 35. We've been together for 10 years, married for 8. By 30, we had already gone through the saving up for a house and trying to get pregnant stages. The latter was difficult. Doctors said I had hormonal problems, that we needed IVF. We spent all our savings on it. Those were years of endless injections, hormonal swings, tears, and empty tests. These failures created the first crack. James became more distant, absorbed in work, and I became irritable and perpetually tired. We stopped talking about anything personal. Our conversations were reduced to bills, groceries, and when the plumber will arrive. Fights became commonplace. We could argue for half an hour about who should take out the trash, but in reality, it was an argument about our silent, slowly dying future. And then, in July, I saw 2 lines. At first, I didn't believe it. I took 4 more tests, different brands. All were positive. I remember James coming home from work, tired, in a crumpled suit. I just handed him the test. He looked at it indifferently at first, like a grocery receipt, and then his eyes focused. He just stood in the kitchen doorway, holding that test, and for the first time in a year, that genuine smile I loved appeared on his face. We hugged, we cried. Back then, I thought this was our new start, that the baby would fix everything. We started planning, we bought this house for more space, chose the nursery, started buying tiny things. We even started talking to each other amicably, without tension. All of August and half of September, I lived in euphoria. But happiness was as fragile as autumn ice. 3 weeks before delivery, which was supposed to be a planned C-section due to my age and history, I felt unwell. I woke up to a sharp, hellish pain in my lower abdomen. Not contractions, it was something else. I woke James, and his panic was so intense that it made me shake. We reached the hospital in 15 minutes, in a fog. In the emergency room, the doctors immediately understood that something was very wrong. Some kind of internal catastrophe. I remember the nurses' faces, their running, the sharp commands. I was taken away on a gurney, and the last thing I heard was the doctor's voice telling James that I had internal bleeding, that it was dangerous. And then came the words that became my sentence, "Sir, we cannot save both. In this condition, you either stabilize the mother or you try to save the baby. You have to make a decision. Now." I blacked out, but that moment, those words, they haven't been erased from my memory. I wasn't there, but I know it's true, because afterward, when I came to, James told me everything, without hiding anything. He stood there, in the corridor, and the most terrible burden fell upon him. And he chose me. He chose me, and a few hours later, I woke up in intensive care, alive, but with an absolute, all-consuming emptiness inside. He sat next to me, holding my hand and crying. He said he loved me, that he couldn't lose me, that we would have another child later. But when I asked about our son, he just turned away and said the boy had died. He didn't survive the emergency C-section, his heart stopped due to complications. James said it was his decision, and he asked me not to judge him. How? How can I not judge a man who decided that my life was more important than his own son's? I couldn't speak then, I just stared at the ceiling, and it felt like there wasn't a ceiling above me, but a huge, black boulder that had crushed my life. James doesn't understand that by saving my body, he killed my soul. I still feel guilty because I survived. I survived by his choice. And this guilt is the heaviest punishment. My son was supposed to be born in October. And by the end of September, he was gone. Everything turned to dust in a month. And for all these 7 years, I have never told James what I truly think of his choice. I just live next to him, like a ghost who reminds me every day of what I don't want to remember. He waits for forgiveness, and I wait for him to understand that there is nothing to forgive. He took away my right to be a mother, and I don't know how to live with that. The first month after the funeral, if you can call a quick, small ceremony with just the two of us a funeral, was a blur of chemical numbness. The doctors pumped me full of sedatives, making sure I was too foggy to feel the edges of the grief. James, meanwhile, seemed to operate on pure adrenaline. He handled all the paperwork, the calls, the cancellation of the maternity leave I'd planned. He became the wall between me and the world, and I let him. I didn't have the energy to lift a finger, let alone face a neighbor. I was just a body recuperating from major surgery, lying in the nursery we had painted a light sage green, a color James insisted on, saying it was calming. Now it just felt sickeningly bright. The guilt hit me hard not when I woke up, but when I finally went home and saw the crib. It was a beautiful, handcrafted wooden piece that we had spent weeks assembling together. Now it stood in the corner, empty, mocking the future it was meant to hold. I remember standing there, my incision still pulling painfully, running my hand over the smooth rail. That's when I realized the horrifying finality of James's decision. He saved me, but what exactly did he save? A woman who was now an empty vessel, staring at an empty crib. James tried everything to fix me, though he never used that word. He cooked, he cleaned, he brought me flowers, lilies, which I used to love, but now they just smelled like a hospital. He walked on eggshells. He wanted me to talk, to scream, to lash out, anything but this cold, silent indifference I offered him. "Please, Sarah," he'd plead in the evenings, kneeling beside the armchair where I usually sat motionless. "Just tell me what you need. Tell me you hate me. Anything." I couldn't. Not because I didn't hate him, but because the hatred was so profound, so deeply rooted, that voicing it felt insufficient, like throwing a pebble at a mountain. Besides, I wasn't just hating him, I was hating the situation, myself, and the universe for putting him in that position. It was too complex for a simple "I hate you." So I just looked through him. His desperation grew over that first month. He started suggesting we travel, take a break from the house. "Let's go to the coast, rent a cottage, clear our heads," he proposed one evening, barely 3 weeks after I came home. I just shook my head. Clear my head of what, James? Of the fact that we were supposed to be 3? He flinched, the way he always does when I mention the T word, the tragedy. He still can't say our son's name. We didn't even get to name him officially, we had decided on Daniel, but we waited to see him first. Now, he's just the boy or the situation. I use his name in my head all the time, Daniel. It's the only way I keep him real. During that month, James also became excessively attentive to money. Before, we were comfortable, but relaxed. Now, he became obsessed with work. He was at his office 12 hours a day, sometimes more, often taking video calls late into the night. I found him one night scrolling through his bank statements, looking stressed, muttering about investments. I asked him if something was wrong with the firm. "No, Sarah. Everything is fine," he said, too quickly, closing the laptop. I need to make sure we're secure. For our future. Our future. A future without Daniel." That phrase felt hollow. I started noticing other changes. He started avoiding eye contact when discussing the hospital bill. When I mentioned the enormous sum we had paid for the fertility treatments, he just shrugged. It doesn't matter now. It was sunk cost. But it did matter. It was the money we had spent trying to get Daniel, and now he dismissed it. The most jarring moment came 4 weeks after I was discharged. We were having dinner, a quiet, mandatory ritual he insisted on, when he cleared his throat and looked at me with that guarded, sincere look he reserves for serious conversations. "Sarah," he began, his voice low. "I spoke to the doctor again. They said physically, you've healed incredibly well. And I know it's too soon to talk about this, but they said if we wanted to try again, maybe next year, we could. The doctors are optimistic about a second round of IVF." I put down my fork. The sound echoed in the silent room. "Try again?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "You think we can just replace him, James? Like buying a new vase after breaking the old one?" "No. Of course not," he protested, running a hand over his face. "But I made a choice, Sarah, to keep you. To keep us. I did that because I want a future with you, and that future, it involves children. It has to." I felt a sudden, sharp coldness in my chest. He was talking about his future, his need to justify his agonizing choice by producing a replacement child. He saw me, Sarah, as the vessel for his redemption, not the grieving mother who just lost her firstborn. His need to have a child was overshadowing the magnitude of what he took away. He wants to wipe the slate clean, prove that his decision to save me wasn't in vain. He thinks if he can just give me another baby, I'll forgive him for the one he let go. I looked at him, truly looked, and saw a man who was fighting his own paralyzing guilt, trying desperately to regain control by planning a new life before we had even finished mourning the old one. He's running from something, and I'm convinced it's not just the grief. It's the secret, unspoken reason why he made the choice to save the wife, the woman he had a decade of history with, over the brand new, fragile life of his son. He thinks that by being extra kind, by offering me a replacement future, I won't ever ask the hard questions. But the question is already burning inside me, getting hotter every day of this agonizing month. It's a dark, terrible thought. Did he really choose me because he loves me, or because I'm the one who handles the finances, the home, and the legacy he wants to leave? His sudden focus on money, his quick dismissal of the IVF cost, it makes me wonder if his decision was practical, not emotional. I didn't answer him about the IVF. I just finished my cold dinner in silence. The tension between us is now thick enough to cut with a knife. We are two strangers sharing a bed, haunted by a ghost we both created, but which only I dare to name. The second half of that harrowing month was defined by the relentless, suffocating pressure of James's forced optimism and my quiet resistance. His suggestions escalated from a trip to the coast to a full-blown proposal to start renovations on the upstairs guest room, to turn it into a home office for me, so you can focus on your designs and have a fresh start. Everything was about the future, about starting over, as if grief was a stain that could be scrubbed out with a new coat of paint. I felt like he was trying to bury Daniel's memory under a pile of projects and financial planning. And his obsession with work became toxic. He was constantly on edge, snapping at me over minor things. One morning, about 3 weeks and 5 days after I came home, I forgot to pick up his dry cleaning. He came home furious, not just mildly annoyed. "Seriously, Sarah? I asked you to do one thing. It's a major client meeting tomorrow, and I need that suit. Can you not even handle that one simple task?" His voice was sharp, laced with an irritation that went far beyond a missing suit. I looked at him, surprised by the sheer volume of his anger. I hadn't raised my voice in weeks, barely spoke above a whisper. "I'm sorry, James. I forgot. I was looking through old photos of our ultrasound." His face instantly drained of color. He hated when I mentioned those physical reminders. The sudden shift from rage to panic was jarring. He dropped his briefcase, making a loud thud, and stepped toward me, his hands raised in a placating gesture, like he was calming a nervous animal. "Sarah, please. Don't do this to yourself. We talked about this. We need to look forward, not backward. You're hurting yourself." "I'm hurting myself?" I finally snapped, the first real display of emotion I'd shown since the hospital. It wasn't loud, but it was cutting. No, James. I'm just living with the truth you created. You chose me. So now you get me. The broken version. The one who can't stop thinking about what you did, and why you did it. The real conflict began right there. He didn't back down this time. He walked closer, his eyes intense. You think I wanted this? You think it was easy for me to stand there and tell a doctor to let my son go? I didn't want to choose, Sarah. But I had to. And I chose the person I built a life with. The one I loved for 10 years. Isn't that understandable? Shouldn't you at least acknowledge the burden I carried that day? I acknowledge the burden, James, I said, my voice shaking with restrained fury. But I don't understand the choice. And the more you try to erase the past, the more it looks like you're hiding something. That word, hiding, hit him like a physical blow. He recoiled slightly, and his carefully constructed composure cracked. What are you implying, Sarah? Are you accusing me of something? I'm accusing you of being too focused on the wrong things. You're obsessed with money, James. You spend 12 hours a day at the office, you're looking at investments, talking about securing our legacy. You haven't looked at the crib once. You haven't asked me how I feel about Daniel. Only how I feel about our potential next child. It's transactional. It feels like you saved the asset that generates income and handles your life, not the woman you love. The accusation hung heavy in the air. This was the core moral dilemma I was wrestling with, the terrible suspicion that had been growing since I noticed his financial preoccupation. Was I merely a practical necessity? His reaction wasn't immediate denial. It was a cold, calculating anger that scared me more than his earlier panic. That's cruel, Sarah. And it's unfair. I work hard for us. I work to ensure that we are stable, that we don't have to worry about debt, especially after what we spent on the IVF. You think money means more to me than you do? He scoffed, looking away. That's exactly the kind of self-pitying nonsense I expected from you. Self-pitying? I whispered. You have no idea what it's like to live with this. You get to be the hero, the man who saved his wife. I'm just the survivor who lost everything. Then he dropped the hard truth, the thing he had been holding back for weeks. I didn't just save you, Sarah. I saved us from something worse. The doctors told me that even if they had saved him, Daniel had severe congenital issues. They said his chances of a normal life were almost zero. It would have been a lifetime of hospitals, debt, and suffering. For him and for us. I chose the path with the least pain. The air went out of the room. The silence after those words was deafening. Congenital issues. He was saying that my son was damaged, and his decision wasn't just about who to save, but about what to save us from. A life of financial strain and endless medical problems. Why didn't you tell me that? I managed to choke out. Because I knew you would react exactly like this, he yelled, finally unleashing the storm he'd been holding back. I knew you'd twist it, make it about money. I made a pragmatic choice in a moment of crisis. I protected you from a lifetime of financial ruin and emotional exhaustion. I chose a future where we could still afford to be happy. His honesty, brutal as it was, felt like the final betrayal. He saw the suffering that awaited us, and he chose to cut the loss. He calculated the value of our happiness against the life of our severely ill son, and he prioritized our solvency. He admitted it. He didn't just choose me, he chose our comfortable, unburdened financial life over our son's struggle. The hatred that had been simmering for weeks finally boiled over, but I didn't scream. I just looked at him with an absolute, dead clarity. So, it wasn't love, James. It was budgeting. And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving him standing there in the wreckage of his exposed moral calculation. The tension was no longer silent, it was a loud, ugly, undeniable conflict about the true value of a life. And I knew, in that moment, that I had to find out everything he was hiding about our finances. He mentioned debt from IVF, but he seemed terrified of being poor. It was time to dig into the details. That's what I focused on for the remaining days of that terrible month. After James's confession about Daniel's congenital issues and his horrifyingly pragmatic motivation, saving us from financial ruin, the air in the house turned icy, thick with mutual resentment. We stopped pretending to be a couple altogether. For the last 4 days of that dreadful month, we coexisted purely as roommates divided by a grave and a massive ledger book. I knew he was expecting me to be devastated by the revelation about Daniel's health. He wanted me to see him as the tragic hero who made the impossible call for the greater good. Instead, the knowledge that Daniel was unwell only intensified my anger, because it meant James had a reason that went beyond just saving the woman he loved. It meant he had calculated the long-term cost of our son's life and found it too high. The only thing I wanted now was proof that my suspicions about his priorities, money over everything, were correct. Since the argument, James had become paranoid about his laptop. He started taking it to the office and setting a complicated password on his phone. This sudden secrecy, coupled with his 12-hour workdays and frantic late-night calls, confirmed my intuition. There was more to the financial stress than just the old IVF debt. My opportunity came on the evening of the 29th of September, exactly 4 weeks since my emergency admission. James had gone out for a run, a new, high-intensity habit he'd picked up to burn off stress, and had carelessly left his office door ajar, something he never did. More importantly, his main computer screen was locked, but I knew his old 4-digit PIN. He hadn't changed it since college. I slipped into his office, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This wasn't about seeking closure anymore, it was about stripping away the lies. I quickly entered the old PIN, and the screen lit up, displaying his usual chaotic desktop. I ignored the architecture blueprints and went straight for the documents folder labeled private. The files inside weren't what I expected. Not investment portfolios or complicated spreadsheets. It was a series of loan applications, all dated in the previous 2 months, August and September. And they weren't small. They were for hundreds of thousands of dollars. The kind of money you borrow to save a failing business, not for standard home renovations. I clicked on the file labeled Firm Default Notice, R. Sterling. What I read next was the real plot twist, the truth that shattered the last shards of my marriage and explained everything about James's manic behavior and financial fear. James wasn't just a successful architect at his firm, Sterling and Associates. He was a junior partner. And he hadn't been honest with me about the firm's stability for months. The document detailed a massive lawsuit brought against the firm by a major client due to a structural failure in a recently completed project. The firm was facing ruin. Worse, the document stated that as a partner, James was personally liable for a portion of the looming debts, which amounted to over $1 million. He was facing professional and financial disaster. The applications I saw were his frantic attempts to secure personal loans and lines of credit, trying to scrape together collateral to pay off the firm's liability and save his career. Suddenly, his choices in the hospital made horrific, crystal-clear sense, twisting my stomach with a cold, sickening realization. He hadn't chosen me solely out of love for his wife. He hadn't just chosen me over our old child to save us from medical debt. He chose me because I was the clean slate. He chose me because if he had let me die, my death, combined with the firm's collapse and the potential medical expenses for a severely ill child, would have left him completely bankrupt, personally and professionally. He would have been left alone, drowning in debt, with zero ability to restart his life. But by saving me, he saved the one major, healthy asset he had left. My income, my design career, our shared, unmortgaged home, which was in both our names, and my credit score were all clean and intact. By saving me, he ensured we could handle the colossal, impending debt from his failing firm. Daniel's medical condition only added a terrifying layer of financial risk he couldn't afford to take. The child, even if healthy, represented an immediate, uninsured expense. The sick child was a bottomless pit of debt. He didn't save the woman he loved, he saved his financial lifeline. He saved his exit strategy from professional ruin. I looked at the documents, feeling the bile rise in my throat. Everything he had said, "We need to be secure, for our future, we need to try again," was a calculated lie, a desperate attempt to maintain the status quo until the financial bomb dropped. His immediate rush to secure our future wasn't about love, it was about protecting the assets he needed to survive the lawsuit. A noise in the hallway, the click of the front door closing, snapped me out of the trance. James was back. I quickly shut down the files, logged off, and slipped out of the office, just moments before he reached the door. I walked past him, my face expressionless, my heart a frozen knot. He was wiping sweat from his forehead with a towel, looking tired but relieved to be home. "Everything all right, Sarah?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but his eyes were searching mine. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at him, the man who had traded his son's life for his own financial stability. "Everything is perfectly all right, James," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. "I just realized something important today. Something about our future. I think we need to talk. Tomorrow morning. Before you go to work." He looked uneasy. "About what?" "About the house," I lied smoothly. "I think I want to sell it. We need to simplify our lives, don't you think?" He hesitated, relief fighting with confusion on his face. He hated the idea of selling the house, his pride and joy. But the suggestion of liquidating a major asset must have appealed to his panicked financial brain. "We can discuss it," he conceded, avoiding my gaze and heading toward his office, oblivious to the fact that I had already seen the ledger. I went upstairs, but I didn't go to bed. I sat in the silent, sage-green nursery, holding a small, unread picture book we'd bought for Daniel. The guilt was gone, replaced by a searing, cold clarity. The man I married wasn't just flawed, he was a ruthless calculator who prioritized his career and solvency over everything, even the life of his own child. And I was the price of his survival. The month was ending, but my action was just beginning. The last day of that devastating month, the 30th of September, felt less like the end of a tragedy and more like the start of a cold, inevitable war. I woke up before James, my mind sharp and focused, every trace of the chemical fog and lingering grief momentarily pushed aside by the pure, adrenaline-fueled need for justice. I spent the early morning meticulously gathering every piece of paper I could find, our marriage certificate, joint bank statements, the deed to the house, and the printouts I had discreetly made of the firm's default notice and James's loan applications. When James finally came downstairs, impeccably dressed for his high-stakes client meeting, he found me sitting at the kitchen table, which was covered not with breakfast, but with documents. He stopped dead in the doorway. His exhaustion and stress instantly melted away, replaced by an expression of pure, gut-wrenching dread. He saw the papers, he saw the printouts from his laptop, and he knew. The facade was finally gone. "Sarah. What is this?" he asked, his voice a ragged whisper. He didn't even try to pretend he didn't know. "This," I said, pointing a trembling finger at the firm's default notice, "is why you chose me, James. It wasn't love. It was damage control. Our son was collateral damage in your attempt to save your career and your bank account." He stumbled into a chair, running both hands through his carefully styled hair. He looked beaten, exposed. "You don't understand the pressure I was under. The firm was collapsing. I was facing total ruin. Everything we built, gone. The debt was astronomical. If I had lost you, Sarah, I would have been completely alone, facing that debt, plus the expense of a massive surgery, plus the lifelong costs for Daniel, who was already so sick. I had to choose the least catastrophic outcome. The least catastrophic for you, James. Not for me. Not for Daniel," I countered, my voice dangerously even. "You talk about the love we built over 10 years, but when it came down to it, you put a dollar value on our relationship. You chose the viable, income-generating asset, me, over the dependent, sickly liability, our child. And you let me live under the delusion of your tragic love for 7 years." He tried to reach across the table for my hand, but I pulled it back as if his touch burned. "I'm sorry. I am so sorry I hid the firm's situation. But Sarah, the choice was still impossible. I loved you. I still love you. And I convinced myself that saving you was the only way for any of us to have a future. A chance to start over, to try again. A chance to try again? You wanted a replacement, James. You wanted to fix the asset that generated the problem, not mourn the person we lost. I pushed the deed to the house toward him. We are selling this house. I want my half of the equity, immediately. You can use your half to try and fend off the firm's creditors. I've already consulted with an attorney. Since the debt is partly marital, we need to dissolve our financial ties before your bankruptcy proceeds. His face paled further. You're leaving me? Now? Sarah, you can't. We just went through the worst thing imaginable. We need to be together. We need each other to get through this debt. If you leave, I lose everything. Exactly, I said, standing up. The sound of my chair scraping against the hardwood floor was the loudest noise in the house. You will lose everything, James. Just like I lost everything that night. You chose the path of least pain for yourself 7 years ago. Now, I am choosing the path of sanity for myself. I will not be your financial shield. I will not be the surviving spouse who carries your burden of debt and your terrible secret. I walked over to the crib in the sage-green nursery and gently placed the children's book on the mattress. I looked at the crib, and for the first time since coming home, I felt a strange, detached peace. My decision was made, driven not by raw grief, but by cold truth. I turned back to the kitchen, where James was slumped, head in his hands, completely defeated. I saved your life, Sarah, he mumbled, his voice muffled by his hands. No, James, I replied, walking towards the front door. You saved your balance sheet. And the price was my forgiveness. And your son. I picked up the small suitcase I had packed the night before, just the necessities. I didn't look back at the white fence, the manicured lawn, or the ideal couple facade we had carefully maintained for 7 years. I got into my car and drove away. The month was over. Daniel was gone, and so was the lie that was my marriage. 7 years later, I have rebuilt a life for myself. I have a small apartment, a successful design business, and financial stability, all earned without James's name or his collapsing legacy. I never married again, and I never had another child. James eventually settled the firm's debt, but it cost him everything. He lost the house, lost his partnership, and now works as a senior architect for a different firm, living in a small, rented condo. He sends me an email every year on September 26th, always saying the same thing, I still love you. I hope one day you can understand my choice. I never reply. I understand his choice perfectly now. The issue isn't that I don't understand, it's that I understand exactly what he chose, and that is why I can never forgive him. Was his choice justifiable? In the sterile, pragmatic world of pure survival and financial metrics, perhaps. But can a mother, a human being, ever truly accept that the love for her child was weighed and found wanting against the weight of a mortgage and a career? I am alive because of him, yes. But the life I live is a hollow victory, defined by the ghost of the son he decided wasn't worth the cost. And that is a burden heavier than any debt.